The room was dark, cold, and silent. Only the sound of humming machines filled the air. Behind thick glass walls, a girl sat with her knees pulled close to her chest. Her hair fell like shadows across her face, hiding the strange glow in her eyes. To the soldiers, she was not a girl, she was a weapon. A dangerous creature kept alive only for war, every day. Guards walked past her cell without looking into her eyes. They spoke of her as if she was an object, not a living being. Keep the weapon locked, they said. Do not feed it more than required, they ordered. But she could hear every word, and each word was like a knife cutting her soul. The scientists treated her even worse. They strapped her to metal chairs and tested her strength. They forced her to move heavy objects with her mind. They pushed her until she screamed, until her powers shook the walls. And when she collapsed, they wrote down numbers, smiling as if she was nothing but data. Yet, when the soldiers left and the lights dimmed, she was only a girl again. She curled into a corner of the cage, whispering words no one cared to hear. Sometimes she whispered names, sometimes she whispered prayers. No one listened, no one answered. To them, she was only a weapon, not a soul. One man, however, did look at her differently. He was not a scientist, not a high officer, only a soldier. With tired eyes, his name was Captain Elias, and unlike the others, he did not hurry past her cage. He slowed his steps, and sometimes he paused. It was dangerous to pause, but he could not help it. He saw the glow of her eyes, not as a threat, but as a cry for help. At first, he told himself it was just pity, but pity turned into curiosity. And curiosity grew into doubt. He asked himself questions no one else dared to ask. If she was only a weapon, why did she cry when she thought no one was looking? If she was only a monster, why did her hands tremble like a frightened child? Why, when the alarms were off, did she whisper, "Please, I don't want to hurt anymore"? Elias knew he was being watched. Cameras lined every corner, recording every move, so he forced his face to remain hard, forced his voice to stay cold. But inside, the questions did not stop. He began to wonder if the real monsters were inside the cage or outside of it. One night, as the storm raged above the facility, Elias found himself alone on guard. The others had taken shelter, leaving him in the silence of the lab. He walked past the cage, telling himself to keep moving. But then he heard it, soft and broken, a whisper that froze him in place. "Please, please don't let them use me again." He turned his head, and for the first time, he met her gaze directly. Her glowing eyes were not full of rage, but of fear. They were the eyes of someone begging to be seen. For a long moment, no words left his lips. Then, against all orders, against every rule, he whispered back, "I see you." The girl's breath caught, as if she could not believe it. Her lips parted, but no sound came. It was only a second, maybe less, before the cameras shifted and the moment ended. Elias straightened his back, forced his steps and walked on, but in his chest, a fire had started. A dangerous fire that whispered louder than any order. From that night forward, Elias could no longer see her as a weapon. He could no longer hear her cries and pretend she was an object. He began to notice the chains on her wrists, the bruises hidden beneath her sleeves. He began to notice how the scientist smiled when she screamed. And with every passing day, his doubt grew heavier. He started to fear, not her, but the people who held her. The base called her Project Seraph, but to Elias, she was no project. She was a soul trapped in a cage, and deep inside, he knew something terrible was coming. Something that would force him to choose between his orders and his humanity. As the alarms of midnight echoed across the base, as thunder shook the skies, Elias whispered to himself, "They think she is only a weapon, but I saw her soul." And in that moment, his fate and hers quietly began to change. Captain Elias tried to act normal. He tried to walk the halls like the other soldiers, silent, cold, and obedient, but ever since that night, when she whispered to him and he answered, He could not silence the voice in his own head. It followed him through drills, through meals, through every hour of the day. Her eyes haunted him, not as a weapon's fire, but as a child's sorrow. Orders kept coming, sharp and clear. The commanders spoke of tests, missions, and numbers. The scientists bragged about unlocking her powers. They said she would be the key to ending wars. They said she was the greatest weapon humanity had ever built. But Elias no longer believed them. He had seen the tremble in her hands, the fear in her whisper. No weapon begged not to hurt. No weapon cried when the lights went dark. He began to notice small things others ignored. When the scientists pushed her too far, she would fight back, not with hate, but with desperation. When the guards threw food into her cage like she was an animal, she never attacked them. Sometimes she even pushed the food back toward the weakest soldier, as if sharing. Elias saw this, but the others only laughed. "Tricks," they said. "She's manipulating us." But Elias felt the truth was different. She was holding on to what little humanity she had left. Doubt grew inside him like a shadow. It poisoned his loyalty. It cracked his certainty. Every time he looked at his superiors, he wondered if they were blind, or perhaps they saw the truth and ignored it. Perhaps it was easier to call her a weapon than to admit she was a soul. One evening, he sat in the mess hall surrounded by other soldiers. They laughed and traded cruel jokes about Project Seraph. One soldier said, "When they unleash her, she burns cities in a single breath." Another replied, "Good, that's what she's made for." The men laughed, but Elias did not. He clenched his fists under the table, his jaw tight. The laughter echoed in his ears like nails scratching his conscience. Later that night, Elias stood again near her cage. The lab lights flickered, the storm still rolling outside. She was awake, her eyes faintly glowing in the shadows, for a long moment. Neither spoke then. Softly she whispered, "Why do you look at me different?" Elias froze, knowing the cameras were still there, but his voice betrayed him, low and unsteady. "Because I see more than they do." Her lips trembled, and for the first time, he saw something like hope in her eyes. "You don't hate me," she whispered. Elias shook his head slowly. "I don't know what they did to you or what they want from you, but I know you're not what they call you." She pressed her hand against the glass, faint energy sparking at her fingertips. Her voice cracked. "They made me into this, but I never asked for it. I never wanted to be their weapon." The words struck Elias like a blade. His doubt now felt like a storm tearing through him. How could he continue to guard her, knowing she was begging for freedom? How could he stand with men who saw her pain and smiled? He felt his heart race, his breath uneven, but he forced himself to turn away. If he lingered too long, someone would notice. Still, her voice followed him down the corridor. "I just want to be seen. Please." That night, Elias could not sleep. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. His orders pressed against his mind like iron chains. Protect the facility. Follow the command. Guard the weapon. But his heart whispered louder. Protect her, not the cage. For the first time in his life, duty and conscience were enemies, and he did not know which side would win. The next morning, new orders were given. The commanders announced that Project Seraph would soon face the activation trial. No details were given, but everyone knew it meant destruction. They would push her to unleash her full power, no matter the cost. Some soldiers cheered, hungry to see the weapon in action. Elias stood silent, dread filling his chest. He knew the trial was not about testing her power. It was about breaking her completely. That evening, he passed her cage. Again, her eyes found him instantly, sharp and searching. "You heard," she whispered, her voice shaking. Elias nodded, his throat tight. "They'll force me," she said, tears catching in her glow. "They'll make me kill, and then they'll say I'm nothing but a monster." Her words burned into him. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to promise her safety, but promises meant little when walls, guns, and orders surrounded them both. He clenched his fists, fighting against the weight of silence. Finally, he whispered, "I'll find a way." Her breath caught, her eyes widening. For the first time, her lips curved into something almost like a smile, not joy, but the fragile spark of hope. Elias walked away quickly, fear pounding in his veins. What had he just done? What line had he crossed? But deep inside, the doubt was no longer doubt, it was decision. From that day forward, Elias could no longer pretend. The commander saw a weapon, the soldiers saw a monster. But Elias saw something else. He saw a soul, trapped in chains, a heart begging to be free. And with every step he took in the cold corridors, one truth became clear. If he did nothing, she would be destroyed, and so would he. The facility grew quieter at night. Most soldiers returned to their barracks, leaving only a few guards to patrol the endless steel corridors. The hum of machines filled the silence, mixing with the distant echo of thunder outside. But Captain Elias could not rest. His mind was chained to the cage, to the girl they called Project Seraph. Every night since the new orders, Elias felt the pressure inside him grow. The activation trial was only days away. He had no details, but he had seen enough missions to understand. They were preparing to break her, to unleash her power in a way that would destroy whatever remained of her soul. The thought twisted inside him like a knife. That night, Elias made a choice. Instead of walking past her cage like usual, he slowed his steps until he stood before the glass. The cameras still watched, but he had studied their pattern. Every 12 seconds, the red lights shifted for a blink. It was not much time, but it was enough for whispers. Her glowing eyes opened as if she had been waiting for him. "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Elias nodded slightly, his throat dry. "I need to know the truth," he murmured. "What did they do to you?" For a moment, she did not answer. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then slowly, she pressed her palm against the glass. "They stole me," she whispered. "My people did not want this war. We wanted peace. But they took me because I was born with power. They trained me until my hands bled. They told me if I disobeyed, they would burn my home." Her words cut deeper than Elias expected. He had thought she was simply a weapon taken from some battlefield, but now he saw a child forced into chains, a prisoner turned into a tool. "What happened to your family?" Elias asked quietly. Her eyes lowered, and for a long moment, silence was the only answer. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know if they're alive." Elias felt his chest tighten. He had lost comrades before, but the pain in her voice was different. It was the pain of someone stripped of everything. He pressed closer to the glass, his voice firm but soft. "You are not what they say you are." Her lips curved into a bitter shadow of a smile. "They don't care what I am. They only care what I can do. When they say jump, I must jump. When they say destroy, I must destroy. And when I refuse, they punish me until I break." Her voice cracked, and the glow of her eyes flickered like a dying flame. "I don't want to hurt anyone, but they will make me. Again and again, until there is nothing left of me." Elias clenched his fists, anger burning in his chest. The soldiers outside, the scientists inside. None of them cared. They had all blinded themselves, calling her weapon so they would not have to see her pain. But Elias saw it clearly now, and he could not unsee it. A sudden alarm blared in the distance. Sharp and metallic, Elias froze, but the girl shook her head quickly. "Not for us," she whispered. "Just another test." Her voice dropped lower, trembling. "But soon, it will be me. They are preparing me for something bigger, something worse." Elias leaned closer, his voice urgent. "What do they plan?" She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know all of it, only that they will make me fight. They will make me kill. They want to prove to the whole galaxy that humans control the strongest weapon alive." The words felt heavy, heavier than any rifle Elias had ever carried. This was not just about her anymore. It was about what humanity was becoming. A race that would enslave a soul just to display its power. He felt his stomach twist in shame. The girl's voice softened. "Why are you different?" she asked. "Why do you speak to me like I'm not a thing?" Elias stared at her through the glass. He had no easy answer, no soldier's speech ready. Finally he whispered, "Because I see you." For a long time neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the storm outside and the buzz of machines. But something passed between them. Fragile and dangerous, a thread of trust woven in the shadows. Elias knew this was no longer doubt. This was a decision growing inside him, unstoppable. He could not let her face the trial, not like this. If he obeyed orders, she would be destroyed. Body and soul. If he defied them, he risked everything. But as her glowing eyes searched his face, Elias felt the choice harden inside him. The shadows of the facility seemed to lean closer, listening, and in that silence, Elias whispered a promise. "I will not let them break you." Her breath caught, her hand pressing harder against the glass. For the first time, real hope flickered in her eyes. "You don't know what that means," she whispered. Elias's jaw tightened, his heart steady. "I know enough." The cameras blinked again, the red light sweeping back into place. Elias forced himself to step away, his boots echoing against the steel floor. But the fire inside him no longer flickered. It burned strong. He was no longer just a soldier with doubts. He was a man with a secret, a man carrying the weight of a promise, and the shadows of the base now held more than silence. They held a dangerous truth waiting to be revealed. The decision weighed on Elias like armor, heavy and unshakable. He knew what he was about to do would mark him a traitor. But the thought of standing by while they broke her was worse. Every day brought the activation trial closer, and every day he felt the clock ticking louder in his head. If he was going to act, it had to be soon. The facility was a fortress. Cameras lined every hallway. Guards patrolled every corner. Doors required codes only officers carried. Escape was close to impossible, but Elias had spent years inside these walls. He knew the blind spots, the shifts, the times when the watch was weakest. He began to study them carefully, memorizing every detail. At night, he would walk past her cage. He would not speak much. But each time his eyes met hers, he gave a small nod. It was a silent promise. A message hidden in the stillness. She understood, and though she never spoke of it, her eyes began to carry a fragile spark of trust. When the storm returned one evening, thunder rolling across the mountains, Elias took his first step. He slipped into the storage bay and studied the supply trucks. They left every 2 weeks, carrying waste and broken equipment. If he timed it right, if he hit her well enough, they could ride the truck out past the gates. But that would only work if he could get her out of the cage first. The problem was the restraints. Every time they took her from the cell, they strapped her with iron cuffs. The cuffs were wired with energy dampeners that suppressed her strength. Without removing them, she could not fight or even run. Elias needed the override key, and only the lead scientist carried it. Days passed as Elias built his plan piece by piece. He marked the scientist's routine. The man always left his office at midnight to drink alone in the officer's lounge. For a few minutes his key was unattended, left inside his drawer. Elias knew this was his chance. If he was caught, the punishment would be death. But every time doubt whispered. He saw her face in his mind, and the fear turned into resolve. That night, he moved like a shadow through the corridors. The cameras blinked. The guards chatted lazily near the gates. Elias slipped into the scientist's office, his heart pounding like a drum. He pulled the drawer open. And there it was, the small metallic key with a glowing chip at its center. He snatched it, closed the drawer, and slipped back out before the cameras blinked again. His breath shook, but he had done it. The first piece of freedom was now in his hand. Later, when he passed her cage, he paused longer than usual. Her glowing eyes searched him, sharp and questioning. Slowly, he lifted his hand just enough to reveal the key between his fingers. Her lips parted in shock, her breath catching. For the first time, he saw tears that were not from fear, but from something else. Hope. She pressed her hand against the glass, her voice trembling. "You mean it? You're really going to try?" Elias nodded once, his jaw firm. "I don't try," he whispered. "I do." From that moment, The plan became more than a thought. It became a promise bound by silence and shadows. Elias began to steal small supplies, a guard's uniform, a piece of cloth to muffle alarms, a stolen access card. Each item hidden carefully beneath the loose tiles in his quarters. He spoke to no one, trusted no one. Even his closest comrades were blind, because if anyone learned the truth, both he and the girl would be dead the night before the trial. The facility buzzed with excitement. Soldiers sharpened their rifles. Scientists prepared their machines. They whispered about the destruction they would witness. Some even placed bets on how many lives Project Seraph would end in the test. The cruelty in their laughter made Elias sick. He sat in silence, his fists clenched. He had already decided tomorrow they would not see her break. Tomorrow they would see her vanish. That evening, he returned to her cage one last time before the attempt. The storm outside was louder than ever, lightning flashing against the glass. She stood when he arrived, her eyes burning with both fear and hope. "Is it tonight?" she whispered. Elias nodded, sliding the key into his pocket. "Yes," he answered softly. "When the storm reaches its peak, we move." She pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging the surface. "I don't know if I can trust this, but I want to," she whispered. Elias met her gaze, steady and calm. "You don't have to trust the plan," he said. "Just trust me." When the thunder roared again, Elias felt the weight of the moment settle over him. Every step he had taken, every whisper they had shared, had led to this night. He turned away, his boots echoing against the steel floor. Behind him, the girl remained in the cage, but her heart was no longer trapped. Because in the shadows of the storm, freedom had begun to take shape. Tomorrow, the escape would begin, and the fate of both soldier and weapon would be sealed. The storm was at its peak. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and rain hammered against the steel roof of the facility. Inside, alarms had not yet been raised, but Elias knew it was only a matter of time. Tonight was the night. There would be no turning back. He moved quickly through the dim corridors, his boots silent against the floor. The override key burned like fire in his pocket. Every camera blink, every passing guard made his heart pound harder, but his face stayed calm, the mask of a soldier on duty. At last he reached her cage. She was already standing, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She pressed her hand against the glass as he approached. "Is it now?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Elias gave a single nod. Sliding the key into the lock, the glass door hissed. The heavy locks disengaged. For the first time, her cell opened. She stepped out slowly, like someone stepping into light. After years in the shadows, her chains rattled, the iron cuffs glowing with suppressed energy. Elias quickly pulled the override key again and pressed it into the cuffs. A soft click echoed, then silence. The glow faded, and her hands were free. She stared at him, wide-eyed, as if freedom felt too heavy to believe. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle, his voice low and sharp. "We're not out yet. Stay close." They moved through the corridors like shadows. The storm outside masked their footsteps, but danger was everywhere. Cameras turned, guards shifted. Every second could expose them. Elias led her down a side passage he had memorized. They slipped into the maintenance tunnels beneath the labs, damp and narrow. The air smelled of oil and rust. But here the cameras were few. Every step forward felt like a stolen breath. But fate does not stay silent for long. A patrol turned the corner ahead. Their rifles raised lazily. For a moment, time froze. The guards stared at the sight of her walking free beside a soldier. Then came the shout, "Project Seraph is loose." The alarm screamed instantly, red lights flashing across the corridors. "Run," Elias growled, grabbing her wrist. The two bolted down the tunnel as sirens wailed above them. The facility roared to life, boots pounding, voices shouting orders. "Contain the weapon," they cried. "Do not let her escape." They burst from the maintenance tunnels into the loading bay. The storm howled through the open doors, wind and rain whipping inside. Elias pointed to the waste truck waiting near the gates. "That's our way out," he shouted. But between them and the truck stood half a dozen armed soldiers, rifles raised. "Stop right there," one barked. Elias aimed his weapon, but he knew he couldn't kill them all before being shot. Then, for the first time, she stepped forward. Her eyes burned with light, her hands trembling. Energy rippled through the air like heat. The soldiers froze, their faces pale, but instead of unleashing destruction, she swept her hand across the floor. The ground shook, crates toppled, lights flickered. The soldiers staggered, dropping their rifles. Not dead, not broken, only disarmed. Elias stared at her, stunned. She could have destroyed them, but she chose restraint for the first time. He saw the truth in her. She was not a monster. She was fighting to prove she had a soul. They ran through the chaos, bullets ricocheting off steel walls. Elias fired back, not to kill, but to buy time. The truck loomed closer, its engine still humming, but the sound of pursuit grew louder, more boots, more shouts. Dozens of soldiers now stormed into the bay. "Don't let them escape," a commander roared. The girl stumbled, the weight of her powers draining her. Elias caught her before she fell, his voice fierce. "Stay with me, we're almost there." He pushed her toward the truck, climbing onto the back with one arm while holding his rifle in the other. Rain poured over them, thunder roaring above. The truck doors slammed shut behind them, but just as Elias thought they were safe, the truck jolted. The driver had seen them. Panic in his eyes, he shouted for help, reaching for the radio. Elias leapt forward, knocking the man out cold. The truck swerved but kept rolling toward the gate. Elias grabbed the controls, his knuckles white. Soldiers fired from behind, bullets pinging against the metal. The girl crouched low, covering her ears as sparks flew. The gate loomed ahead, tall and locked. Elias cursed under his breath. They would never get through before reinforcements swarmed. Then the girl rose, her eyes blazing. "I can open it," she said, her voice shaking. Before Elias could stop her, she lifted her hands. Energy surged, a beam of light ripping through the storm. The steel gates groaned, bent, and then tore apart like paper. For a moment, the whole world seemed to tremble. The truck roared through the shattered opening, rain pouring down, alarms fading into the distance. Elias kept his hands steady on the controls, his heart racing. They had made it out, but not clean. Behind them, the base was alive with fury. Dozens of vehicles, drones, and soldiers poured out. The chase had only begun. Elias glanced at her, soaked in rain, eyes still glowing faintly. She looked back at him, fear and hope mixing on her face. "Where do we go now?" she whispered. Elias gritted his teeth, staring into the storm ahead. "Anywhere they can't find us," he said, but in his heart, he knew the truth. They would never stop hunting. The only way forward was through fire, and so the chase began. Not just for freedom, but for survival. The storm raged as the truck tore across the mountain road. Elias gripped the wheel with both hands, rain blinding his eyes, thunder shaking the ground. Beside him, the girl sat silent, her hands trembling, her breath uneven. Behind them, the glow of headlights pierced the rain, soldiers chasing in armored vehicles, their engines roaring like beasts. They had escaped the cage, but freedom was still far away. The road twisted, narrow and broken. One wrong turn and the truck would plunge into the abyss below. Bullets struck the metal doors, sparks flying, the sound echoing like drums of war. The girl closed her eyes, whispering softly, "They will not stop. They will hunt us until we fall." Elias's jaw tightened, his voice sharp through the storm. "Then we don't fall." The truck swerved as explosions lit the road behind them. Drones soared through the storm, their red eyes glowing. The soldiers were unleashing everything now, desperate to drag Project Seraph back into her chains. Elias knew they would never let her live free. This was no longer an escape, it was a war. The girl's voice shook. They want me to lose control. If I unleash my power, everything will burn. Elias glanced at her, his eyes steady even as chaos raged around them. Then control it, he said firmly. Show them you're more than what they made you. The road ahead ended in a collapsed bridge. The storm had torn it apart years ago, leaving only broken steel in a canyon below. Elias cursed under his breath, jerking the wheel. The truck slid into the mud, skidding to a stop at the cliff's edge. The engines of their pursuers roared closer, headlights closing in like wolves. Elias leapt out of the truck, rifle in hand, rain pouring down his face. He pulled the girl behind cover, his voice fierce. This is it, no more running. She shook her head, fear in her glowing eyes. There are too many, you can't fight them. All, Elias gave a grim smile. Then we fight until there's no fight left. The first wave of soldiers rushed through the storm, rifles blazing. Elias returned fire, his shots sharp and precise. Every bullet bought them seconds. Every second mattered. The girl crouched beside him, her hands pressed against the earth, energy crackling under her skin. She tried to hold it back, but the pressure grew. The storm itself seemed to bend toward her. Lightning dancing closer with every breath, Elias shouted over the thunder. Don't give them what they want. Give me what's real. Fight with your soul, not their chains. Her eyes widened, his words cutting through her fear. She rose slowly, her hands glowing brighter. The soldiers shouted, firing wildly, but she lifted her arms and the ground shook. Walls of stone burst upward, blocking their advance. The rain turned into a curtain of mist, hiding her and Elias from sight. The soldiers hesitated, but the commanders barked orders. Push forward, the weapon cannot be lost. Dozens more stormed through the rain. Elias fought with everything he had, his rifle burning hot, his body aching, but even as bullets flew, he felt something different in the air. The girl was not breaking, she was not unleashing chaos. She was shaping her power with will, with control. Energy rippled from her hands, not as fire, but as shields of light. They shimmered like wings, protecting both of them from the storm of bullets. For the first time, she was not a prisoner of her strength. She was its master. The soldiers faltered, fear in their eyes. This was not the weapon they were promised. This was something else, something greater. The commanders screamed at them to advance, but hesitation spread like fire. Some lowered their rifles uncertain. Then came the blast. An armored vehicle rolled through the mist, its cannon glowing. It fired, the explosion shaking the ground. The shield cracked, the girl staggered, her knees buckling. Elias caught her, shouting her name. Her eyes glowed fiercely, her voice breaking. I can end this, let me burn it all. Elias shook his head, gripping her shoulders tight. No, you don't have to destroy, you just have to choose. She closed her eyes, tears mixing with rain. Then she rose again, her body trembling but unbroken. Her power surged outward in a wave of light. Not fire, not death, but force. The blast swept through the canyon, tearing rifles from hands, flipping vehicles, scattering soldiers. No one died, but no one could stand. The battlefield fell silent except for the storm. The soldiers lay stunned, their weapons gone, their courage broken. The commanders shouted, but their voices drowned in thunder. Elias stood beside her, rifle lowered, his chest heaving. She swayed, weak but alive, her eyes still glowing. They wanted a weapon, she whispered, but I am not what they made me. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. No, you're more. For a moment, the storm itself seemed to pause. The girl looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes despite her exhaustion. In that moment, Elias knew the truth. This was not the end of their fight, but it was the beginning of something greater. The soldiers began to retreat, their fear louder than their orders. The chase had ended not with destruction, but with defiance. Elias and the girl stood at the edge of the broken bridge. The world spread wide before them, a future uncertain. But in their hearts, the choice was made. They would not return to chains. If they were to fall, they would fall free. And as lightning split the sky once more, Elias whispered, "This is our stand, and we will not break." The battlefield was silent, except for the storm. Broken weapons lay scattered across the mud. Armored trucks burned faintly in the rain. The soldiers who had once shouted her name in fear now crawled back, shaken, their courage shattered. Elias stood beside her, chest heaving, rifle lowered. And she stood too, swaying but unbroken, her glowing eyes dimming slowly as her strength drained away. For a long moment, nothing moved. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. The girl looked at her hands, trembling, wet with rain. And light. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I did not kill them." Elias's eyes softened, his voice calm and steady. "No, you showed them who you really are." She stared at him in disbelief, as if waiting for him to change his words. For so long, every voice had told her she was only destruction, only fire, only a weapon. But his words did not chain her. They freed her. Tears slid down her cheeks, hidden by the storm. "You saw me," she whispered, "not what they made me." Elias gave a faint nod, his expression fierce. "I saw your soul from the beginning." Her lips trembled, hope flickering like a fragile flame. A warmth spread through her chest, something she had thought was gone forever. For the first time in years, she felt more than fear. She felt alive. The storm slowly began to ease. The thunder rolled into the distance, the rain softening into a steady drizzle. The battlefield lay quiet, but Elias knew it would not remain so. More soldiers would come, more machines, more orders. They had only a moment, not the war. But sometimes a moment was enough to change everything. He looked out toward the mountains, sharp and dark against the sky. Beyond them lay villages, forests, and lands untouched by the facility's cruelty. Maybe they could run, maybe they could hide, but no matter where they went, the hunters would not stop. Elias's jaw tightened, his voice low. "If we want to survive, we can't just run, we must stay ahead of them." "Always," she turned her glowing eyes toward him, searching his face. "You would stay with me?" She asked softly. Elias met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes," he said firmly. "I will not leave you. Not now, not ever." Her chest tightened, her breath unsteady. No one had ever said those words to her. Not her captors, not her tormentors, not even her memories. For the first time, she was not alone. They left the broken bridge behind, moving into the wild mountains. The path was harsh, steep rocks and endless mud. But with every step, the chains on her soul felt lighter. The world was wide, dangerous, but it was also free. She looked at the sky through the storm clouds and whispered, "I never thought I would see the world like this again." Elias gave a faint smile, his voice quiet. "It's yours now, not theirs." As they climbed higher, the girl slowed, her body weak. Elias noticed and stopped, kneeling beside her. "You've pushed too far," he said gently. She shook her head, pressing her palm against her chest. "It doesn't hurt like before," she whispered. "It feels different, lighter." Her eyes flickered softly, no longer burning with rage, but glowing with something new, hope. Elias sat with her beneath the shelter of a rock. The rain dripped steadily, but the storm had finally begun to pass. He looked at her, not as a soldier watching a prisoner, but as a man watching a soul rediscover itself. "You're more than they will ever understand," he said quietly. She met his eyes, her voice fragile. "Do you really believe that?" "Yes," Elias answered without hesitation. "I have from the moment you whispered in that cage." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, small but real. And in that moment, she felt something stronger than chains, stronger than fear. She felt human again. The days ahead would not be easy. They both knew it. The facility would never stop hunting them. Commanders would never stop sending soldiers. But together, they had already done the impossible. They had broken the cage, defied the orders, shattered the lie. Together, they had proven that she was not a weapon, she was a soul. As the storm clouds parted and the first light of dawn touched the mountains, Elias stood and offered his hand to her. She hesitated. then placed her trembling fingers into his. He pulled her to her feet, steady and strong. They stood side by side at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the vast valley ahead. The world stretched out before them, endless and uncertain, but they were no longer afraid. The girl whispered softly, her voice carried by the wind. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring." Elias squeezed her hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Then we face it together," he said. She closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep into her heart. For the first time since her capture, she believed in tomorrow, not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, but as a soul who had been seen. And so they walked into the dawn, not as soldier and experiment, not as weapon and wielder, but as two souls bound by defiance and hope. The world would hunt them, the war would follow them, but they would not break, because to the world she was just a weapon, but to him, she would always be more.